So today we have a 2009 Ford Edge, and it is in for a brake complaint. The brake complaint is that the steering wheel is vibrating. So we're out on a test drive. We're going to confirm the complaint. If you can see that in the video, I got up to about 55 miles an hour and I hit the brakes. Now I'm off the brakes, but a couple things happened there. First thing is the whole car started shuddering, and I could feel the brake pedal pulsating, which is basically the pedal going like that. And also the second thing that happened is the steering wheel, let me do it again real quick so you can see it on video. Let me get up to a good speed, about 50 miles an hour, 55. Pulls to the right a little teeny bit. But that is a very common complaint. It happens to millions of cars all over the road, and it's a very common complaint. So we're going to show you what causes that, explain it, and fix it for you. Okay, we have our 2009 Ford Edge. We were on the test drive and we noticed the customer's complaint, which was the brake pedal pulsating and the whole front end of the car pulsating and shaking. So as a technician, you kind of know what that symptom is, but you need to verify it. Verify the complaint by recreating the symptom in the car, and then in the shop you need to bring it in and make sure there's no other problems that could be contributing to that. So we brought the vehicle in, we shook it all down, we checked all the suspension pieces by shaking the wheels, and you look and feel, and you can feel it and see it when there's play. There's no play. We checked all four wheels, and the brakes are fine as far as the pads go. There's plenty of brake pad left. If you can see it in here, it's kind of tough to see on the camera, but and my light just died. There it goes. There's a lot of brake pad material in here. This is the backing plate of the brake pad. This is the brake pad itself, and this is the rotor, the part that turns. So that part that turns there is the rotor. There's plenty of pad left, and you want to look at the inside pad and you want to look at the outside pad, and it's hard to see on camera, but I can see them, and the pads are wearing evenly. You want to look at that. This is a time to gather information. If one of the pads are worn unevenly, like let's say the inside or the outside pad is almost worn out and the other pad has got a lot left, then you've got a caliper slide problem, which we're going to show you how to clean the slides when we put this back together. So really this doesn't even need pads. The culprit is the brake rotor, this big disc here. And what happens with these is they end up warping, and that will cause the pulsation, which if you see what's happening here, if you see again this rotor turning inside the brake pads, what happens is you push your brake pedal down, which pushes brake fluid down through this line into the caliper. It squeezes the caliper onto this rotor, but in a nice flat rotor, it would spin around, it wouldn't cause any issue. When you have a warped rotor, which this is basically a metal disc, and it would lay perfectly flat on the ground, it would have no parallelism, or it would be a flat disc, in other words. What happens when they get really, really hot and you slam on the brakes, or maybe you go through a puddle, that's steaming hot, almost like it'll look like red hot. If you've ever watched a NASCAR race and saw the camera where they show you the red hot, molten hot metal rotor, obviously yours isn't that hot, but it's similar, and that thing is so hot, you slam on the brakes really hard or go through a puddle of water, and it just warps that rotor, just like an old record, an old vinyl record if you left it in your car. Not that anyone remembers what those are, but if you left it in your car, it would warp. And if you tried to play it, you could hear the warp and how it plays. Well, when you squeeze your caliper on a warped rotor, the pads are being pushed open in the high spot of the rotor, squeezed closed again in the low spot. It's doing that really fast. That brake fluid's going back up into your master cylinder and your analog brakes. Your caliper's working 100 times more, or a lot more than it's supposed to. So a warped brake rotor is bad. You do not want to keep it on your car because it can contribute to more problems. Like I said, it's making the caliper work a lot more than it would, and it's making all the other components in the brake system, the suspension and everything's getting more abuse when you have a warped rotor. So we're going to start taking this apart and show you how to replace these. We're going to replace the brake pads and the rotors. If you're going to take this all off, I mean, brake pads are 40 to 50 bucks for a good premium set. We got ceramic pads. We don't want to put a nice brand new brake rotor on with worn out brake pads. That's how you get noises, and you get the brake pads have a glaze on them because they've already been super hot. You've got a nice new rotor surface. Put a nice new brake pad on there so that it grabs, it breaks in properly. And why would you put, even though these have a lot of pad left on them, you might put a brand new rotor on that's going to outlast the brake pads, so you'll be doing the job earlier. If you put new pads and new rotors on, your next brake job is hopefully a little bit farther away. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to show you about the proper way to kind of get rid of the brake fluid in the caliper. Brake fluid is essentially, it's a hydraulic fluid, it's essentially makes you have a solid way to stop the car. In the old days when you had the Fred Flintstone car and you put your feet ground, you know, he puts his feet out to stop the car. That's a solid mechanical thing he's doing to stop the car. Your car's doing the same thing. You push on the brake pedal, instead of your feet hitting the ground, it's pushing brake fluid down through this hose into the caliper, squeezes these, and stops the car. That fluid is hygroscopic, that's the scientific word I guess you could call it, and it absorbs stuff. It absorbs moisture. You have heat build up. You have temperature changes. The brakes get really hot, then they get cold. They get hot, then they get cold. There's condensation, there's corrosion, oxidation, all kinds of things happening in this system. It's all in your brake fluid, and you do not want to push that bad brake fluid back up the line and into the system. You want to get rid of that. And the garbage that's in the fluid will get pushed down to the caliper. So inside this caliper and inside these chambers is dirty, nasty fluid. We're going to push that out. So we're going to show you how to do that. We're not going to push it back up into the caliper, back up into the master cylinder. I'm going to clamp this line off. I'm going to open this bleeder. We're going to catch the fluid in this little catch can thing here. And then I'm also going to push this pistons in the easy way without even taking the calipers off. And I'll show you what I mean. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to use a nice long-handled flathead screwdriver. I'm going to wedge it in here to the outside of trying to get the outside of the brake pad or the rotor. And I'm going to get a good leverage spot. And I'm going to slowly, I'm not going to do it right now because I don't have the line open. I'm going to slowly pull this, which is going to push the pistons in, and which will displace the brake fluid and push the brake fluid out. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to use my helper to hold this for me. And remember with, you can see the brake fluid coming out already. This fluid's actually not that bad. The other thing I'm going to look at is what color it is. When it's a nice and clear or translucent, when you can see through it, it'll be a yellowish or brownish. That's a good clean, that's fairly clean fluid. So it's definitely seen much worse. As I start pushing on this, you see the brake fluid start to go down. And I don't want to break my screwdriver or anything else, so you just kind of do it slowly. And I'm also going to do the other side. One thing I didn't mention is the master cylinder. You do want to make sure you got nice clean fluid in the master. You wouldn't want to have an empty master cylinder when you do this. No, I didn't because I checked it ahead of time. Now we're getting the pistons slowly pushed back in there. Start putting a little bit more juice on it. Once you get enough room, you can start moving your screwdriver around to get different leverage. There it goes, real good. So what we just did was we totally depressed the pistons into the caliper, which we would have had to do later to put the brand new brake pads on. And we've also, now with it fully in, whoops, I can't do it like this. Whoops, that was a bad idea. Basically now, oh, I forgot something. This is the easiest path or least resistance, but to make sure you don't push any stuff up there, I use a line lock to break, this is a way to prevent fluid from going in any direction. And it doesn't damage the brake hose like vice grips or any of the other things. It's a very light pressure to just squeeze that hose so that it's so that you can't let fluid go up. Okay, so I'm going to flip this over real quick. We're done. Now I'm going to tighten up the bleeder, and the bleeder's nice and snug. So now we've got a little bit of dirty brake fluid that we just bled out of the caliper. There is some corrosion and stuff in there, and now it's not pushed back up into there. Now we can start removing the brake pads and the rotors. The calipers are okay, so we're going to start removing the brake pads and the rotors. We got two 17mm bolts that hold the caliper on. We got two 19mm bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. And then really that's the only bolts we've got to remove. We've got the rotor, which I'll show you that. This caliper, you don't want it to hang on the brake hose. Brake hoses are an overlooked thing all the time. They get damaged mostly from the inside out. You can't see the damage. You don't know about it until there's an actual failure. You don't want to cause the failure, so you want to be careful with these hoses. So I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to sit it up here somewhere, or I'm going to use a bungee cord and hang it up out of the way so that it doesn't pull on this hose. This is a nylon inside here, this hose, and if it's hanging on it, you're pulling on the fibers, and what happens is you pull the fibers out, and then remember the fluid has to flow both ways. When the fluid flows down and into the caliper when you're pushing on the pedal, if you have a bad brake hose, when you let off the pedal, that fluid's supposed to go back up the hose, but if you have a failed internal hose, it would go this way, but the fibers would come out and open when the fluid goes down into the caliper and then close back up when the fluid tries to go back up, and now you've got a bad brake hose. You're going to have a brake pad that won't release. It's going to potentially keep the brake pads on engaged onto the rotor. So you'll get stuff like pulling. You'll get one side is just super hot and the pads are gone, and that's the kind of stuff you want to look out for. So we don't have that here, so we're going to go ahead and start replacing this. So 17mm. I use a nice long-handled ratchet because these bolts are always, these are caliper bolts. They're always corroded. Oh, yeah, but nice long-handle ratchets, and it pops it loose. Yes, I know it's not spinning it off like an air ratchet. Yeah. See, again, it's so much easier if you use nice tools, or the proper tools, in other words. So what we have here is a pin bolt that the lubrication is pretty much gone, and now there's so much corrosion in there it's really holding these bolts in. But these bolts are meant to be, these are pin slider bolts. So they hold the caliper in place, but they also allow it to move. So you got to have lubrication on there. So that we're going to have to clean up and lubricate it. This one you can still see the lube, it's coming off of it, but the top one's not. So you got to use a little extra persuasion to get it off. And that's it. So now the caliper should come right off. We lost the two rubbers, but I'll grab those. I'm going to rest it up here for right now, which is not hanging by the brake hose. It's sitting on the rotor. Find my rubber pieces. Okay, so I basically just lifted the caliper up, laid it up here, put this on here so it doesn't fall. The hose is not kinked or anything, it's up out of the way. So now we're going to take the pads off. So we have two brake pads here. The inside and the outside, as you can see, there's plenty of pad left. But again, we're going to replace them because we're putting new rotors on. And if you look at what happens with these brake pads, you know, obviously this rotor is spinning. The brake pads squeeze the rotor to stop the car. They have to slide in and out. So they're sliding on top of this bracket in and out, and they have little clips here. That all needs to be cleaned up really good and lubricated before you put it back together. So we're going to pop them off now, the brake pads. and we'll get rid of them. The marks that are on here, that's actually from me when I was prying on it. So that's all that is. And then you have these clips here, which hopefully come on our new ones. So we'll lay them to the side. Now we need to take off the caliper bracket, which is this piece. We need to take this off. There's the rubber, it's still in there. We need to take this off to get the rotor off. So these are 19 millimeter. I'm going to use my same ratchet because I know my impact is not going to get that loose. In fact, I'll show you. Now I know it's an air impact, I mean a electric impact, but it actually got it. But I'm going to show you the other way because most people are not going to have this tool. The other way is a nice big ratchet just like I showed you earlier with lots of leverage. When you take these bolts off, I like to orient them and how they came off. I know that's the bottom one, the top one I'm going to put there. The reason you do that is sometimes, depending on the vehicle, one of the bolts are going to be different size. So now we have the brake rotor, which really it just floats on here. You do want to look closely around the hub. Make sure there's not a single bolt or a single bolt that's holding it on, or a little round metal washer that sometimes hold the rotors on. Most of the time, depending on the car, and you want to make sure, but you can throw those away. The clips are there for when they manufacture the car to keep the rotor on. You just these are meant to float. There's no bolts holding this rotor on. The only thing holding it on there, well, I can't get it off, is corrosion and rust. So pretty much any time you do a job, you're going to need one of these little baby sledgehammers, because it's just get the right tool. It's just like a big long ratchet. It helps you. One whack with this, and now it's loose. Now I'm going to reset my caliper because I didn't do it good enough. Okay, so the rotor, here's the old rotor. It is severely rusted. In fact, you can see where the metal's been changed now because of the corrosion and the rust. It's just the chemistry of the metal is actually changing, and or that pad wasn't contacting very well. So we're going to make sure we clean that. This thing is very rusted up. That's normal. We're in Florida. This car's got 115,000 miles on it already, but if your car's 5-6 years old and you're near oceans or salt up north, then this is normal, and that's going to be sometimes the whole reason for replacement. Okay, next thing we want to look at, we're close to putting parts back on, but we need to clean this up. This is all rusted and corroded. This hub, another thing that can cause a brake pulsation is if this hub is is not perfectly flat. I'm putting a perfectly flat rotor onto a perfectly flat hub, no problem. If I put a perfectly flat rotor on with a hub with a big rust spot here, guess what? I just made a new brake pulsation and probably destroyed that rotor and didn't fix any of the customer's problem because I'm creating it all over again. So we're going to clean this up. We're just going to spray some penetrating oil, maybe sand it off a little bit, and then we'll get going. So we soaked this in some penetrating oil, let it soak in for a little bit. Then we took our wire brush and we just knocked off some of the, most of the big rust. And that's basically all we did here. And then if you have a spot that's got a lot of rust on it, you can take a little piece of sandpaper. You want to get this nice and perfectly flat. Knock off the big rust. It needs to be perfectly flat. That's all we're trying to accomplish here. No big rust mounds. So same thing with that is the brake caliper bracket. This thing is pretty corroded and rusted. However, there's nothing really on here that matters as far as the appearance, except for the slides. And right where the brake pads slide, they sit inside. Your brake pad sits right inside here, and has to slide in and out. And the top of the flange part sits here too. So this needs to be removed, cleaned up. Hopefully we got new ones. Usually the brake pads will come with new ones of these. If you have the option to order brake pads, don't go the cheapest route. If you go with a premium set, you usually will get the clips with it. These clips, you're going to save $10 to do the brake job. when these clips hold the pads, they prevent vibration. They're the cause of lots of noises and problems. So brake pads are not something to go cheap on. So we're going to go take this over to our parts cleaner so we don't get it all over the floor. So, okay, so this is the caliper bracket. It's got clips, remember, that we were showing you. We're going to show, and then our new premium brake pads comes with all new clips. So this is where you can spend a lot of time if you screw up. So we're going to try and show you how to do it without screwing up. Just take one off at a time. I took one old one off at a time. I took this one off. I laid it down. First I matched it with the appropriate one. I match all sides and everything. Same thing on this one. This one I'm going to show you. I did it. I'm going to pull these off. I matched them already. Lay that down. Pull this one off. Should be this one here. Just make sure everything's in the same. Sometimes a piece of the clip is broken off, and the new one has the rest of it. So now we have a bare caliper, but we still have the corrosion, and we want to knock that off with some rust penetrant and some. Just want to get the big stuff off, and then you want to use a little sandpaper just to clean off the rust again. You can put a little anti-seize or lubricant on the caliper bracket itself, but you don't want to put too much. Just put a little teeny bit. If you put too much, you're going to squeeze the brake. You're going to jam the brake pads in, and they won't be able to slide. So that's why you want to be careful with graphite type stuff. Or you want to make sure you're cleaning everywhere where the brake pads slide. So that's why it's a good idea to pay attention when you're taking it apart. So we're going to take this into our parts cleaner bin and clean it up with PB Blaster and get it a little bit cleaner, and we'll be back. So now we're ready to start putting it back together. We got a nice clean hub. We got a nice brand new rotor. These rotors, when you buy brand new brake rotors, they'll usually have, usually they're in a bag now, which is a great thing, a sealed bag, and they also might have an oily substance on them. That's normal. That's called cosmoline. What that does is protects the metal from oxidation, corrosion, while it's sitting on the shelf waiting for you to buy it. Okay, so we put our rotor on. We put one lug nut on. That's to keep the rotor flush so that we don't have trouble putting the pads on. We got nice thick rotor material. We got nice big fat brake pad material. It all needs to fit together. So if this is cocked out, you're going to have a heck of a time getting the pads in there. So now we got our nice clean and lubricated caliper slide that we did clean up real good, put new clips in, we lubricated them. We're going to put more, we'll show you, you just put lube. You just put lube right on where the brake pads slide, and you want to try not get it on your rotor because it's lubricant. Then we're going to get our caliper bracket, we're going to put it back in place and bolt it back on. Again, make sure you don't put the wrong bolts in the wrong spot. Our caliper bracket bolts are the same size. Our caliper pin bolts are two different sizes. Okay, so we got our caliper bracket on and our rotor. One thing I forgot to mention on the rotor, I mentioned the cosmoline, the oil stuff. You can wash that off with just pure soap and water. That's all you need. That's actually the best thing to use. So then we're going to put our brake pads in. If you took your old pads off, you want to remember how they went. These are actually identical, so it doesn't matter. But you can look at the old ones and remember we took them off and laid them down in the orientation they came off. So you can see there's where the two old pistons were, and there's the old brake clip. Our nice brake pads came with new brake clips. We will have links to these brake pads and the rotors for this exact car and all the cars that, all the other years it fits. We'll put a link there for it. Because these are great ceramic brake pads and rotors, and this whole job, doing it yourself is like $100 or less. So pads, put the top in first. You're working with a little gravity because you got these clips that want to fall out. So put it in place first, push up on it, then you don't have to deal with that clip anymore. Pull this clip down, wiggle it in, and there you go. It should be able to slide, remember, so you want to, test your slide. If you pull it out, just same thing. Put it in at the top. A lot of people fight here, do a lot of fighting, like I'm almost doing. But if you really just pay attention to what's happening, it's really easy. And the pad needs to be able to slide, which it does, and it's lubed. These are the points that need lube, each surface, each piece of surface there, because that's what slides on these little clips here. Same thing, and make sure you keep the friction material here nice and clean. So same thing on this side, put the top in first. And there you go. And now, because we have our lug nut holding the rotor on, it's all nice and straight up. Pads are straight up. Now our caliper, which is hanging out here, which remember we've already pushed the pistons in already. Caliper should be able to slide right over this, right into, oh, we got our little rubber boot to put on. The rubber boot fell off, so you do want to put that back on. Let me do that before I slide that back on there. Brake fluid is fine on rubber. Oil is bad on rubber. So if you have an oil leak, not that it's getting on your wheel, but if oil can eat rubber and other components, so remember that. You want to fit the boots so that your bolts can slide through. I got the top one set, the bottom one's being a pain. But if the boot's not set right, that's what can allow air and corrosion to get in to cause you issues with those brake pin slides. So remember which way your bolts came out. If you laid them down in the orientation like we said earlier, see how they're different sizes? The top bolt, the long bolt is on the top. You want to make sure it's covered by that boot. And the bottom bolt is the short one, same thing. Okay, and once you get it past the boot, they should spin in pretty easy. We got them all nice and clean and lubed now. You also want to clean out that's another thing, I didn't point that out. When this bracket's off, we cleaned and lubricated inside here. And you do want to do that. This is not at the highest torque. And you want to come back here with a torque wrench and torque all 4 of these bolts. Okay, so now it's in place. This caliper should slide back and forth just like it does a little bit. There's not a lot of room there. And we are closer to done now. We can take our lug nut off because that was just holding our rotor on. I'll post the torque specs in text, or I'll look them up and tell you when I do it here in a second. So there's take your line lock off. Make sure the rotor spins nice and even. You're going to hear it because it's being grabbed by the brake pads, and it does. So we are pretty much done on this side. We're not done with the brake job, but this side's done. We're going to go ahead and knock the other side out real quick. Then we're going to bleed the brakes and show you how to bleed them and get rid of all the nasty brake fluid. So my cameraman just had a good question. He's looking at this caliper here, and there's a bunch of writing, and there's an R and an L, and there's a FOMOCO. That stands for FOMOCO, Ford Motor Company. The L and the R, this is a manufacturing thing. This is nothing you need to worry about, but we got the question. So this caliper is a right-hand caliper. It's on the right-hand side of the car. Right hand is always passenger side in the US vehicles. And the bleeder is always got to be at the top of your caliper. The reason for that is the air is always at the top. You have to be at the highest point to get the air out, so they mount the bleeder at the highest point. So this caliper is identical to the other side, except, meaning in manufacturing, Ford or whoever makes these for Ford made one caliper, you know, one mold, and poured the mold. This is cast, and they poured a mold in there, and this basically could be used for the right and left. At the very end, they either drill a hole in the right and put a bleeder valve, or drill a hole in the left here. And if this was on the left, which it is, we just saw it, if this caliper was lifted up this way, this would be the highest point, so the bleeder valve needs to be here. So the whole reason that's there is during manufacturing, they say, okay, that's a right side caliper, put it so this at the highest point, and if it was the left, it'd be there. That's it. Okay, this car's done. We're gonna go get our torque wrench, and we're gonna check the torque specs for both these bolts, and we're gonna torque them. Then we're going to then we're going to gravity bleed the brakes, so you can see how to do that real quick. It's a safe way to bleed your brakes at home without messing with the hydraulics too much. So we've got all our bolts snugged down with our electric impact wrench. They're not tight by any means, so we need to tighten them down. The caliper bracket bolts for this vehicle are 98 foot-pounds, and the pin bolts, the smaller bolts, are 65 foot-pounds. So we get out our torque wrench, and we set it to 98, which is actually about right there. And then we go ahead and make sure we have them torqued. So the way the torque wrench works is you tighten it until it clicks. Whoops. Once it clicks, you're tight. We got about a quarter turn until it clicked on that one. So same thing with that one, quarter turn till it clicked. I'm going to do the other side, then I'll switch the socket out to the 17 and come back and finish. This is the 17. As you can see, it wasn't tight. Now it's tight. Okay, so first we're going to snug all the lug nuts down, just snug them down. You don't want to keep torquing on these. If I kept cranking the torque that this gun will put out and I tighten these too much, I have the chance of warping that rotor again. Besides that, that is not proper. If you over torque a lug nut, you're doing a whole bunch of stuff. You're messing the threads up on the lug nut and the stud. You're putting force, you're squeezing the brake rotor between, you know, you're pulling the brake, you're pulling the stud and squeezing on the brake rotor. You basically could warp the rotor over again or do damage to it. So you're gonna torque it. You have a torque wrench, so we're just gonna torque it to the proper spec. So we're gonna get our torque wrench and finish this up. Then we're gonna go up top and show you the brake fluid. Okay, so to torque them, all we do is we set our torque wrench to the specified setting, and then you just do the same thing. If you see a shop doing this, you still do the star pattern, by the way. Okay. If you see if you're at the shop and they use an impact gun, if they have a really long extension, that's a torque stick. That's proper. That actually twists the steel pipe, the length of it twists until it reaches the torque. So that's good. We're just using this to show you that this is a torque wrench, and that's how you do it. So we're going to finish the rest of the wheels, then we'll do the brake fluid. So now we're back up top. We're going to just make sure the master cylinder is full and clean fluid. What we're going to do here is explain a couple things about the brake fluid is used as a gauge for you to know how worn out your brake pads are, believe it or not. Now, it's not a perfect gauge. You still need to check your brake pads, but in a perfect system, a brand new system, you've got brand new thick brake pads, brand new thick rotors. You've got fluid all the way up to close to the max level on a brand new brake system. As you wear the brake pads down and the rotors down, the metal rotors wear out actually just some cars more, just as much as the brake pads, not more. But so the brake pad and the rotor wear, so that little bit of space needs to be filled back in. Well, that's what the brake fluid does. It displaces the material that's worn out from the brake pad and the rotor. So as it displaces it, your fluid level will get lower. So if you had a brand new car and it was close to the max and you took a note of it and then you watched it over a year or two and see the fluid go down to the min, if you went and you should have your brakes checked about every 2 or 3 years at least. So if you see that, that's another reason, and it depends how much you drive, but if you see it's low, then it doesn't mean the brake fluid is low. It means that your brake pad and rotor material is low, and this fluid is now displacing that. So now we push the pistons all the way back into the caliper. That fluid we got rid of. We didn't want to push the nasty fluid back into it. I'm going to fill this up to a little over minimum. Then I'm going to get in the car and push the brake pedal down a bunch of times until it gets hard. And the reason I want to do that, and the reason you want to do that, this is very, very important, you need to push the pistons back out against the brake pads and then out against the rotor again and displace that with brake fluid. Now I'm going to fill this up, and I don't know if you get to see it or not. Also, a lot of minivans and a lot of cars like this, sport utilities, the master cylinder is underneath the cowl. You don't have to take the cowl off or anything. You could, but you can either use a turkey baster type thing, or I just use a little glass vial. That's what I use with AC systems. And just put a little brake fluid. That's nice, clean, brand new, clear brake fluid. It's got a little bit of yellowish, brownish tint to it, but you can see through it. I'm going to put a little bit more in. Brake fluid is hygroscopic. I might have said that word earlier. It means it absorbs everything. So while it's open, you don't want to leave brake fluid open. When you're done with it, you put the cap back on and seal it, because it's actually absorbing everything right out of the air. It's also really bad for you. You don't really want to get it on your skin. Pay attention to the fluid level, because when you put clean fluid in, it is harder to see compared to old fluid. So now I don't want to fill it up too much. I'm going to go right up to the max level. I'm not going to start the engine. I'm going to get in the car and pump the pedal up, and that fluid level is going to drop. You're probably not going to see it with the camera. It's hard to see with the regular naked eye. But you must do that. Pump the brakes back. Pump the brake pads up. Otherwise, you're going to get in the car and start driving, and you will have no brake pedal. You're just going to be pushing air for the first 2 or 3 times. Okay. I don't know if you could see the fluid level earlier, but it did just drop down. So that shows you right there, I just displaced fluid. I put fluid into the calipers, displacing the space that was there between the pads and the new rotor. There was a tiny bit of space there. Now they're pushed out against the rotor, and the brake fluid's filtered in. So it's pretty much just underneath the max level. I don't want it to be overfilled. You don't want anything overfilled. So it's perfect right where it is. Now I'm going to go test drive it and verify that the pulsation in the brake pedal, the steering wheel, and the whole car is gone. The other thing on this rubber cap, that's extended. That actually needs to be pushed back down. Okay, that's what displaces the air at the top. When you're using the brake fluid, this cap goes out. It's designed to be like that. So when you fill it back up, you need to put it back so it can work like that again. Make sure the cap's on nice and tight, clicks all the way on, and we're pretty much done. Now we just need to test drive it, verify everything. And thank you very much for watching. Please visit autopartsdirecttoyou.com for any auto part needs. We have lots of videos on YouTube. Please check us out and hit like, and hit share on Facebook, please. And thank you very much for watching.